Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
It's your boy Taco Bell Wani, and I was just listening to the episode of the UFC unfiltered podcast, and Dana White joined at the end of the episode, and he came out and refuted a lot of the MMA media reports that have been going around. For one, there's been talks of Luke Rockhold versus Alexander Gustafsson for almost a month or longer now. Talks of them fighting for an interim title. I believe Alexander Gustafsson's team has said something along the lines of, if we do fight Rockhold, it will be for the interim title. Rockhold has talked about moving up to 205, but I believe he's only going to do that for an interim title shot. So there has been a lot of talks, not only just from the media, but from both sides, interest in a potential light heavyweight interim title fight. Now, with that being said, the problem is if Luke Rockhold wins an interim title, he becomes the interim light heavyweight champion, and if Daniel Cormier decides to come back down to light heavyweight, we've got a little bit of a situation because they're teammates who don't want to fight, who wouldn't fight each other. So Luke Rockhold and Daniel Cormier, if they became the interim champion and regular champion, then they would be, have to unify those belts in a fight, and that's a really weird situation. Now, if Gustafsson won the interim strap, wouldn't be as much of a problem. But we still don't know what's going on with Daniel Cormier as far as he's fighting Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title, and he's talked about he's been conflicted on, is he going back down to light heavyweight or is he not? So until we know 100% what's going on with Daniel Cormier, a light heavyweight title fight for Luke Rockhold doesn't make much sense right now. So with that being said, Dana White did confirm Gustafsson versus Rockhold is being targeted, and he even said it's for UFC 227, but he said it wouldn't be for a title fight. That's still a good fight. Alexander Gustafsson versus one of Daniel Cormier's teammates, former UFC middleweight champion who's coming up to light heavyweight. Luke Rockhold struggled at middleweight. He's coming off of a loss to Yoel Romero, KO loss. So it's really out of going back down to middleweight and trying to climb back up to another title shot and having to fight 2 or 3 more middleweights, or move up to the not so stacked light heavyweight division where you can fight one of the top contenders in Gustafsson and maybe be one fight away from a title fight. So it's a good career move, it seems like, for Luke Rockhold to go up to light heavyweight at this point. And also, he's got a little bit of a rivalry with Alexander Gustafsson already, who doesn't really like his teammate, and Gustafsson's even came out and said, yo, in the meantime, since Daniel Cormier's tying up my division, I'll beat up his teammates and stuff like that. So that is one fight Dana White came out and talked about for UFC 227 between Gustafsson and Rockhold. He said not for an interim title fight, but more interestingly, this we really have to unpack. This part is crazy. I don't know what the fuck to think about this. Dana White has confirmed that the UFC is working on George St. Pierre versus Nate Diaz for UFC 227. Now, this would just be a random lightweight bout if it happened. I just don't see this fight happening, man. And Dana, they can be working on it. I believe they're working on it. I believe they probably want Nate Diaz and GSP in there. That's a huge fight. Why would the UFC not want that fight? I believe, but the thing is, Nate Diaz has been out for a little over 2 years now, and GSP is not a great matchup for him. I even believe Nate Diaz has been asked about a potential GSP fight in the past, and he talked about how that's his brother's fight. He doesn't really want to step on his brother Nick Diaz's toes. Nick Diaz is supposed to be coming back to the UFC soon. GSP is a fight you would think would make more sense for Nick Diaz, a welterweight. I mean, because think about it. GSP is coming from a middleweight title fight with Michael Bisping. He beat Michael Bisping for the title, vacated the title because he got colitis, and now we're talking about seeing GSP at 155 pounds, somewhere he's never fought. I mean, there's been pictures of GSP recently looking pretty small, but at the same time, GSP hasn't fought at 155. He was just fighting at 185, and there was talks of GSP legitimizing his belt, against like a Robert Whittaker or one of the #1 contenders at middleweight. But instead, George St. Pierre, he got colitis, which seemed like a very serious issue, very serious medical condition. There's talks of people that have colitis and, their lives are completely changed. But it looks like the colitis just got GSP to lose a little bit of weight, because now he's coming back must be healthy as ever to be able to make this extreme weight cut. And I say extreme weight cut because you hear weight cutting is the worst part as a UFC fighter. I mean, they train multiple disciplines: wrestling, jiu-jitsu, striking. They train these, they spar this, they fight, and you still hear fighters say the worst part is cutting weight. So for GSP to be the middleweight champion, go through colitis, and now be coming back to cut this weight, and it's not even for a super fight or for a belt, it's just coming to fight Nate Diaz just because he's a big name. It's not a legacy fight. GSP's talked about a Nate Diaz fight in the past, I believe, and he wasn't too interested because he said people are just going to expect him to win. This is more of a Tyron Woodley fight. People were like, why the fuck was Tyron Woodley wanting to fight Nate Diaz? You know, they expect him to win. It's kind of the same thing with GSP. Like, what? When you hear Tyron Woodley versus Nate Diaz, it's just as confusing to me as GSP versus Nate Diaz. Both of these guys are two of the best welterweights in the world, and they're fighting like a lightweight contender. You know what I'm saying? And it's just because Nate Diaz is a big name, just because Nate Diaz has fought Conor McGregor. It's not like he's #1 contender. It's not like he's even in the top 5 of the lightweight division at this point. He hasn't fought in 2 years, so the only reason GSP would fight Nate Diaz is just for the money, you know, because, you know what I'm saying? Like, it just doesn't seem like something GSP would do, right? He's talked about the fights he wants. He wants legacy fights, and if he can't get the legacy fights, then he wants the biggest fights possible. Now, Nate Diaz is a household name. That was what Tyron Woodley would say. Like, yeah, Tyron Woodley, he's a guy. He wants legacy fights. I want to fight people that are, you know, the GSP. Tyron Woodley wants to fight the GSPs. You know, he's called out the Conor McGregors, even the Michael Bispings at a point. Never got those big fights, so he was like, all right, I'll settle with Nate Diaz. And if he can't get Nate Diaz, he's just going to keep defending his belt. But GSP is a guy who's also said, you know, it's about like where a fighter is their stock. You know, what does it mean for him? GSP's not just coming and trying to, you know, just fight the easy fights. That, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not calling Nate Diaz an easy fight, but it is a good matchup for GSP as far as making sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's all I'm saying, man. So Dana White has said that the UFC is working on GSP versus Nate Diaz, but that's just it's just really weird to me. Nate Diaz, though, to be fair, there's not a lot of guys for him to fight. We have heard the rumors of Nate Diaz fighting at UFC 227, rumors and reports, but there's not a lot of guys for him to fight, because if he's not fighting Conor, then he's not fighting. Tony's coming off of injury. Conor McGregor's doing whatever he wants. Khabib, Ramadan, he's the champion. Definitely not going to be fighting at UFC 227. So there's the top 3 guys. Then, of course, you got Eddie Alvarez. He's not fighting again until the UFC gives him a new contract, even though he met with Dana White recently, also revealed in this UFC Unfiltered episode. He said, Dana White said that they're working on Poirier versus Alvarez, the rematch. So that takes the #4 and #5 guy out. You got #6, Kevin Lee. That's a guy. I don't really see Nate Diaz taking that fight. You know, he's got his stock's a little too high for Kevin Lee at this point. So, of all the possible fights for Nate Diaz, there's really only a couple of names that would make sense for him. If you're Nate Diaz, okay, I'll take GSP. I would definitely see Nate Diaz probably taking a fight with GSP, if that's what he's going for, a huge fight. Because other than Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz has had the opportunities. He's had title shot opportunities. Hell, he's been able to offer to fight at 170, allegedly, against Tyron Woodley for the welterweight strap. Nate Diaz has been offered fights at 155, or 150, 170. None of them have came to fruition. So you're under the impression that Nate Diaz is kind of just waiting on Conor. You know, we can get into all the excuses Nate Diaz has had. You know, I want someone to ask me nicely. I want people to be, you know, make me excited to come back and fight. I'm going to boxing. Forget this. I'm riding bikes. I mean, Nate Diaz literally has had a lot of different reasons over these couple of years for not coming back. So to now come back versus GSP, all right, it's a big fight. I get it, Nate Diaz. It's in California. I see why Nate Diaz would take the fight. In California, still a big name. Not Conor McGregor, but hey, it's GSP. But then as far as why he wouldn't take the fight, kind of stepping on Nick Diaz's toes. I'm surprised this isn't Nick Diaz versus GSP. You know, Nate Diaz versus GSP is just out of left field to me. It's kind of like Tyron Woodley versus Nate Diaz. What? You know what I'm saying? Whenever you heard Tyron Woodley versus Nate Diaz, the fight doesn't make a lot of sense except for, okay, they're both big names. Same here with Nate Diaz versus GSP. Way out of left field. The only reason I get the fight is because it's two big names. But Nate Diaz and GSP, other than that, this fight doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So the UFC is probably going to have to offer GSP, you know, something. Because GSP, he's coming, like I said, he's coming off of a title fight at 185. So to now be coming down to 155 just to fight a top 10 lightweight, what's the point for GSP? A win? You just want to win over Nate Diaz? I mean, you're not fighting for a belt and money. Maybe these guys both are going to get pay-per-view points, I would assume, because they're pretty big stars. Even though it's not a title fight, I don't know. Dana White came on the UFC Unfiltered podcast, and he said a lot of things that just, I don't know, they didn't seem, I don't know, man. I don't know you know what I'm saying? Like, they just aren't what we've been led to believe recently, right? As far as the Ariel Helwani-Nico Montano situation, Dana White refuted that. Eddie Alvarez not fighting until he gets a new contract. Dana White smoothed that over. It looks like they're working on the rematch with Poirier. And now as far as Nate Diaz versus GSP, out of left field, Gustafsson versus Rockhold, not for the interim title. That's not the reports we have been hearing. So these are just the new updates from Dana White, and of course Dana White's everything he says is not known to come true. It's not like Dana White tells no lies. Ariel Helwani's credibility honestly is a lot better than Dana White's as far as the stuff Ariel Helwani says usually comes to fruition. Whenever Ariel Helwani says this fight's in the works or this fight's almost finalized, it usually happens. This is going to happen, it usually happens. Dana White, that's not always the case. Now, this is a long video, but hey, I got a lot of stuff to get done today, so it might be the last video. Bear with me. There's one other huge thing that these rumors also, give credence to. If GSP versus Nate Diaz is really in the works, what does that mean about Conor McGregor versus Khabib? You guys know I recently came out and talked about a possible Conor McGregor versus Khabib, Moscow, Russia. UFC looks like they're going to be coming to Moscow, Russia, September 15th. And the thing about that is it's looking like it's going to be in the Olympic Stadium, huge capacity. People have brought up the fact that, millionaires don't want to necessarily travel to Russia like they would to Las Vegas. I get that. The business, like the gambling and stuff, you probably be better off in Vegas. But if you're just trying to break ground and have your first fight in Russia and you need a huge fight for an Olympic Stadium, you might be looking at a Conor McGregor versus Khabib fight. And now why I bring that back up here is because when you talk about Conor McGregor's potential opponents, who are the three guys on the list? If you're not talking about fucking Floyd Mayweather. Nate Diaz, George St. Pierre, and Khabib. If the UFC is trying to work on something with Nate Diaz and GSP, that means they're not trying to make that fight with Conor. If Dana White didn't come out and say we're working on Conor versus GSP or Conor versus Nate the trilogy, no, he's putting, look, it looks like they're talking about GSP versus Nate Diaz. Maybe the winner of that fight fights Conor next. Maybe we see that happen. But all I'm saying is if the UFC is working on GSP versus Nate Diaz, that leaves Conor McGregor open for Khabib. And we know about the Russia situation going on September 15th. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be playing out. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you guys updated as the rumors and the reports come out. So with that being said, it is what it is. A lot to unpack here, man. If you want to just hear Dana White's interview on the UFC Unfiltered podcast, it was the most recent episode. He was at the end of the episode. He talked about, as I said, the Nico Montano Valentina Shevchenko situation. He talked about Rockhold versus Gustafsson, Poirier versus Alvarez, and also GSP versus Nate Diaz. I still can't grasp that one. We've heard about the GSP versus Nick Diaz rumors. Freddie Roach, came out recently and talked about GSP working on a rematch or getting ready for the Nick Diaz rematch. This was months ago. There's talks of Nick Diaz returning to the UFC. Why would Nate Diaz be getting the GSP fight? I just don't see that. He said in the past he don't want to step on his brother's toes. So who the fuck is Nick Diaz coming back and fighting if you're talking about Nate and GSP? So I honestly, if you want my honest opinion, I don't see this GSP versus Nate Diaz fight happening. I don't know why it's not, whose side's not going to want the fight, but Nate Diaz has been out so long. I don't know if this is the fight. I just didn't expect this. We'll see what happens, though. If the UFC announces Nate Diaz versus GSP at UFC 227, I'll be surprised. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out. And as always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell right next to it so you're notified every time I upload a video. I'm out.
Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking DO double G.